Cunningham.
Thank you, Acting Speaker. Acting Speaker, I want to take the opportunity in speaking to the appropriation bill to firstly talk about a bit of overall context and then go to some very specific issues around the budget, the challenges facing the nation and how that's playing out in my own electorate. There are two great challenges facing the nation and have been for 18 months now. One, of course, has been the COVID pandemic, and along with that, the health response required of the nation, of governments, of the population, of businesses, as we deal with the global pandemic. There's also the economic challenge, and the budget, the last time we were here that was unveiled by the government, should be an opportunity to address the economic challenges that we face and to set a forward plan for how we come out of what was a hit to our economy, there's no doubt about it, and build a stronger future for families and communities. I have, unsurprisingly probably to this chamber, some serious concerns about both of those strands of challenge in front of our nation. And of course, I want to acknowledge that they don't sit separately. They actually are intimately intertwined. How well we get the health response in place is a direct effect on how the economy performs. And so these are very, very significant issues. Just on the response to the COVID pandemic, I want to say first of all that I think this government really needs to step its game up. Really needs to step its game up. The mixed messaging that has been a consistent feature of this government's response to the COVID pandemic is causing confusion and hesitancy about vaccines in our community. It is not uncommon in any week, whether Parliament's sitting or not, to see media conferences where different government ministers, and including the Prime Minister, are giving different messages to people about what the current situation is. People are saying to me in my community, what exactly am I supposed to be doing about vaccination? Because there's no consistent media information campaign running. There's no consistent, reliable, turn on the TV and you see ads and so forth. People are just uncertain, and then they see these mixed messages. Only, of course, over the last week, mixed messages about what the rollout of the new orders of Pfizer vaccines at the end of the year mean for people who are over 50. And then, we're told, oh no, we heard wrong, or media reported wrong. The amateur hour mixed messaging has a cost, and that cost is the increasing hesitancy we are seeing in our communities about taking up the vaccine. And we know that getting the mass vaccination of our population is one of the most significant things we can do, not only for our health, but also for our economy. And when I look over the record of the government, I just have to say, every now and then I get a little notification on my mobile phone that the COVID Safe app has updated itself. I sort of wonder what the point is of that and how much was expended on that particular little project. We really need to step the game up as a federal government to the challenges that the COVID health issues continue to put before us, and I would certainly call on the government and the relevant Prime Minister ministers to do exactly that. On the economic side, look, it is a touch bemusing to see speaker after speaker from the government side get up and say, we've been so fantastic, JobKeeper was the saviour of jobs and economies in this country, when we well remember the fact that we were told that was a ridiculous notion. When Labor was first raising wage subsidies, we were told that that was ludicrous. There was no way we were going to be doing anything like that. It was really only when we saw those huge lineups happening outside Centrelink offices, that the government suddenly, I think, had a bit of a panic attack and thought that this would be very problematic for them, that you actually saw the formation of that sort of the national gathering of business, government and unions, and full credit to the ACTU, I have to say, who were the real ones who pushed for a wage subsidy-based program. Now, it's great. At the end of the day, I love a government that learns from its mistakes, but it's a steep learning path indeed, as my colleague says, and it is a touch bemusing to see the JobKeeper initiative used time and time again by members of the government as an example of how competent they were in responding to the economic pressures of the COVID pandemic, when we know full well that it hadn't been for Labor and then the business and union community calling for a wage subsidy, they would never have gone down that track at all. And I would also make the point that even when they did introduce JobKeeper, what they did was knock down amendments Labor put up, and then we've been constantly campaigning to them about the sectors that they left out and the workers that they left out. And so when now, at this point in time, they talk about, we deserve a pat on the back because we've sustained so many jobs, sure, that's true, and that's good for those sectors where that happened. But in my area, like I know so many people's areas, we lost a lot of people out of our universities. We had a lot of people in casual work who weren't eligible for any income support. I personally met workers in the travel industry who, subsequent to the end of JobKeeper, lost their jobs, women in their 50s who will really struggle to get another job. And so I think it's a miscall by the government to be demanding that they get a pat on the back. It's disrespectful to the fact there are sectors of our economies and communities that haven't come through stronger as a result of the government's intervention, and that perhaps it should be looking at more specific and targeted program and support. And I want to come back to one local business that I met last week to indicate that. Don't even get me started on skills. I mean, you want to talk about promise and massively under-deliver. Look at this government, indeed since the Abbott government, on skills. They just love to say they're a big supporter of apprentices. Come and let me get a photo with a tradie. Let me, pretend I'm laying bricks with an apprentice. They just love doing this stuff, and then they make these huge announcements and they never deliver. Every time we get the quarterly, then annual reports of the number of people in apprenticeships, it's going backwards. I mean, it's the absolute epitome of what is so wrong with this government in terms of its great joy in making big announcements, splashing large amounts of money, and then having the capacity to rebank that money and re-announce it because they don't actually deliver what it was that they announced in the first place. So I will remain extraordinarily cynical about the government's announcements in the skills area. Look, I do welcome the aged care additional funding. There's no doubt after the Royal Commission, which I'll just say they had to be dragged kicking and screaming to hold, that it is a blight on each and every one of us until we address how our most elderly citizens are being cared for in our aged care system, whether that's in home care or in residential care. And so I do welcome the additional support for that. But again, we know there's over 120,000 people, for example, on the waiting list for home care packages, and people will continue to get older and become eligible, so that inflowing demand will continue to rise. And the government has allocated 80,000. So you're leaving a structured undersupply in there, and that's having real effects. I had a family in my office just last week with mums in hospital and rehab after serious operations, 91-year-old dad's at home, and that family are really struggling trying to continue to provide him with the support that he needs. So just a big gap, as always is the case, between backslapping, big announcements, we're throwing all this money at it, no problem with the $1 trillion in debt anymore, this is all really good. $1 trillion, and in actual fact, what the budget was a list of where are our political pain points, what are our political problems, how can we throw something at each of them to tick it off to try and take the heat out of it, and there was no structured reform agenda in that whatsoever. So it's $1 trillion spent without a vision of what new structured reforms are going to be in place to see us well into the future post-COVID. I just want to, in the few minutes that are left to me, in line with what I've been outlining in my general comments, to talk about a local business. Now, this local business, sadly, as I said to them, they're not alone in the concerns that they came to me with. I've had a number of local businesses in the travel and tourism sector in my local area who are still really struggling. But Brad and Kylie Fussell from my area run Wanderers Australia. Now what they do is they run a program where they get young people from around the country into a sports team, and then they take them overseas. They play sports against schools and other junior teams in whatever place they go, and then they also incorporate that with like an educational program. So for example, go to France, play some games with local school teams and juniors teams, visit the battlefields, learn about the Australian participation in the war. So really a great initiative, and they're passionate about what they do. They just love it. They love the ties that they're creating, the friendships they're creating, and the knowledge that is an important part of that program for young people. 25 years they've been doing this. Well, obviously, with the COVID international closures, that had real implications for them. They said to me they wanted to acknowledge that they got JobKeeper, so that did provide some assistance, but of course as a partnership they weren't both entitled to JobKeeper, so it was only a one person eligible to get the JobKeeper. But since that's ended, they wanted me to pass on to the government, the circumstance hasn't changed for them. They can't pivot to a domestic option because young people already play in their local teams locally and can travel in Australia with their families. So they can't pivot the business. They are still really struggling to keep their heads above water. And there's the response of the government to say that, we've dealt with all these issues and we don't need JobKeeper anymore, and Labor, it's ridiculous to be saying there are ongoing issues. There actually are. And members opposite must have businesses like this in the travel and tourism sector themselves that still haven't been able to get back on their feet. And so they really do need some form of continued targeted assistance. The previous speaker talked about the lost carryback tax option to support businesses. Well, a small business like this is not eligible for that either. So I do think there are these really very small family businesses that I would encourage the government to have a look at, because, as I said, in the travel and tourism sector in my area, I continue to meet with local businesses, just like Brad and Kylie from Wanderers Australia, who are still really struggling. And all of my colleagues would be like me. If you met this couple and saw their passion for education and their passion for the work they've done for 25 years, it would break your heart to think that that business is going to fall over, where I think a government could look at some sensible targeted programs that would support small businesses like theirs. So in the context of the budget, I've acknowledged locally some good initiatives. I've said to my local community, I'm going to watch this closely because there's always such a big gap between announcement and promise and actual delivery. and I do think there are areas the government could look to do better in still. Thank you, Acting Speaker.